Tack så mycket. God morgon, tack så mycket för inbjudan. Och jag är jätteglad att vara här. För att göra den presentationen lite bättre, jag vill gärna presentera i engelska. Tack för förstående. So this presentation will be held in English. And the title of the presentation is How Can We Develop a Health Aging from a Research Perspective. And this presentation will be divided into two parts. First, I will present health aging in general, and later my colleague, Anna Karen Weber, will present the second part, mainly focused on functional aging. So healthy aging, mission impossible. Here are the people at the Aging Research Center trying to answer this question. So this is a map showing you life expectancy at birth. And the yellow color represented people aged 70 and plus. The green 75 and plus, and the dark green aged 80 and plus. You can see a big proportion of people aged 70 and plus all over the world. So we say that aging is a positive phenomenon. And secondly, population aging is a new phenomenon. If you look at this graph, so this is the life expectancy at age 65 years old. If you look at this point, 1950 to 1960, the proportion of people aged 65 years and above only less than 14%. And over the 40 years development, the life expectancy increased dramatically. Okay. And thirdly, aging continues through life. Why we say that? So here shows the life course from the childhood, youth, adulthood, transition period, and until old age. During the whole life course, we experienced many factors that would influence our health status, that including biological factors, which including oxidative stress, vascular damage, neurodegeneration, as well as inflammation. And at the same time, we also experience the environmental factors, such as the physical environment, social determinants, as well as the social structure. We also have psychological influence, which including personality, attitude, and beliefs, lifestyles, behaviors. All those factors acting during the life course, including the genetic background which we were born with, influence our health status, from good health to symptoms, morbidity, and from functional impairment to disability. So to answer the question, health aging mission impossible, our answer is no. Indeed, a healthier aging is already a reality today. Here I'm going to present you the health status of elderly population. There are three major characteristics. The first one is brain aging. So this figure shows you the prevalence of major chronic diseases from the Consommon project among people who were aged 75 and older. So from this table, you can see that dementia and hypertension consisted of the big proportion, from 20 to 30% of the population. The second phenomenon is multimorbidity. This figure shows you the prevalence per person per 100 of multimorbidity among people 60 years and above. From this figure, one can see that people with 2 and more diseases, which is represented by white and the purple. So if you count these 2 and more diseases together, this proportion have increased with aging after 75 years old. So this 2 plus 3 and more diseases consistent more than 50% of the total population. And especially those with 3 and more diseases increase with age. And thirdly, I will show you the connection between body and mind, so that the impairment in our body can also related to our brain function. This study shows you the conversion from mild cognitive impairment to dementia. If we look at the green line, this line shows those people with multimorbidity, and the upper purple line shows no multimorbidity. So people with multimorbidity have much higher probability converts to dementia during the follow-up. So after giving you the characteristic of the health status in the elderly population, we have identified 2 strategies to improve the health of elderly people. The first strategy is acting on relevant risk factors. So those factors including hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and related vascular diseases. Those factors we have to act already in the mid-age. So this figure shows you the risk of dementia at midlife for those who have diabetes. The purple line represents dementia, the red color represents Alzheimer's disease, and the yellow vascular disease. And the reference is 1. So all those who above 1 are at higher risk of dementia. So from this figure, one can see that both diabetes at all, in total diabetes, mid-age diabetes, as well as later life diabetes, all related to risk of dementia. Especially those midlife diabetes is more risky compared to late life diabetes. So this figure shows you the midlife body mass index in relation to dementia risk. And if we take the BMI between 20 to 25 as the reference group, this is the normal BMI. Not only those who are obese at elevated risk of dementia, also those who have elevated BMI, their risk of dementia is much higher compared to the normal BMI. Another factor is the leisure activity on risk of cognitive impairment. This figure shows you here is the baseline. So if people are doing leisure activities, which including mental, physical, or social, whichever you are doing, so that moderate, this yellow line, red, those high activity, very high activity, those group. You can see at least doing one leisure activity, their cognition will keep the same or even some improvement. And for those who are not doing any activities, their cognition decline over time during 2.5 years. So whichever kind of activity you are doing, it's all have a beneficial effect on our brain, our cognition. Oh yeah, this second strategy. This is another study showing the mean age at dementia onset delayed by an active lifestyle, which is also measured by leisure activities. So this bottom bar represented the low score in all 3 activities. And from this figure, one can see those people who are doing any one of mental, physical, social activities, their age at dementia onset was much later. And those who have 3 activities, their age at dementia onset is much, much later, and more than 1.5 years. In a recently published study, we looked at lifestyle and social factors on survival after age 75. So this study, we have created a risk profile. If we look at this column, this column are those people with a low risk profile. Low risk profile including people who have normal BMI, who are no smoking, doing at least one leisure activity, have also a rich social network. From this figure, one can see that those who have a low risk profile have a longer survival here compared to those who have a high risk profile. Very nice dose-response relationship. And we found a low-risk profile adds 5 years to women's leave and 6 years for men's leave. And one can see that the same pattern was observed for women and for men. Similarly, this trend was also observed for oldest old, for those who are aged 85 and above. And again, similar pattern was observed for those with chronic conditions. This, sorry. So this white bar. So the possible hypothesis behind this active lifestyle and possible protection on brain function, mainly brain reserve. So we think that higher education with more work complexity, have to be married and to have a rich social network, to do leisure activities, all this would increase our brain plasticity, which will prevent us from against the pathological changes in our brain, therefore delay the onset of clinical symptoms of dementia. And recently, there are randomized clinical trials have been started with cognitive training. This is carried out by Lars Beckman's group, and multi-dimensional intervention studies. In short, it's called FINGER, which is organized by Mia Kevi-Peto's group. So in conclusion, healthier aging is a reality today, although there is still a lot to understand. So for healthy aging, there are 2 strategies. First, acting on relative risk factors. Second, promoting healthy lifestyles. So this is the first part of the conclusion. Now I will give the floor to my colleague, Anna Karen. Thank you. This is the content.
Thank you. Now we move on to the physical aspects of aging. I will start with some prevalence of physical limitations and disability. In Sweden, about 2/3 of the people who are 80 years and above have some mobility problem, for example, difficulties in walking 100 meters. And 1/3 need assistance with one or more of their activities of daily living. Physical limitations are more common in people of older ages, in women, and in people with low education. It's also more common among people living in rural areas compared to those living in urban areas. So, what is causing these physical limitations? Perhaps physical limitations are caused by chronic diseases and nothing else matters. Or we all know that when we get older, everything goes so much slower. We start to walk slower, our muscles get weaker, and our balance is not what it used to be. We all start up here at peak performance on our own individual performance scale. Then something happens, and that is aging. We get older, and there is an age-related decline of physical performance. But why? Why is that so? Chronic diseases have been suggested to play a major role in physical decline. But what is really the role of multimorbidity in physical limitations in late life? Multimorbidity, defined as the coexistence of two or more chronic diseases, has been identified as a major issue in gerontological medicine. As you just heard from my colleague, its prevalence increases dramatically by age, and it's associated with many adverse health outcomes, such as cognitive decline and mortality. So, how big is the role that chronic diseases and multimorbidity play in the age-related decline of physical performance? Recent data show that chronic diseases and multimorbidity was strongly associated with physical limitations such as impaired walking speed, balance, and muscle strength. However, chronic diseases and multimorbidity explain only a small part of the age-related differences in physical performance, suggesting that the strong association of age with declining performance may persist despite accounting for multimorbidity. So, what other factors beside chronic multimorbidity may also be associated with physical limitations in late life? The effect of cardiovascular risk factors such as smoking and diabetes on physical limitations in old age has gained an increasing interest during the last few years. Most studies have focused on individual risk factors. However, these factors frequently coexist as people age. A recent study from our center has identified cardiovascular risk profiles for mobility limitation by aggregating major cardiovascular risk factors and cardiovascular diseases separately. The results showed that in the cardiovascular risk factor profile that consisted of hypertension, inflammation, diabetes, obesity, and smoking, an increasing number of risk factors linearly increased the likelihood of mobility limitation, even when adjusting for cardiovascular diseases. Similarly, in the cardiovascular disease profile, an increasing number of diseases was strongly associated with an increased odds ratio of mobility limitation. However, the association of cardiovascular risk factors with mobility limitation was only evident among those who were younger than 80 years and among carriers of the ApoE epsilon 4 allele, suggesting that the association between cardiovascular risk factors and mobility limitation vary by age and genetic susceptibility. Another study looking at education-related differences in physical performance found significant differences in the lower extremity components of physical performance, even when adjusting for chronic diseases and lifestyle-related factors. However, further analysis showed that these differences were only significant among those who had been white-collar workers in midlife and not among the blue-collar workers. And this result suggests that both manual work and low education among non-manual workers are associated with a worse physical performance in late life. The same study also showed that the education-related differences in lower extremity muscle strength were only significant among those who were inactive, who had less than weekly levels of physical exercise, suggesting that promoting physical exercise may be one strategy to reduce education-related differences in physical performance among older adults. Indeed, it's known that leisure time physical activity is related to more years lived without disability. But to what extent do older people in Sweden, Stockholm, meet the current recommendations of physical exercise? Recent data show that 46% of those who were 65 years and older met the World Health Organization's recommendation of health-enhancing exercise, which is defined as 30 minutes of light physical exercise performed most days of the week. And 16% met the recommendation of fitness-enhancing exercise, which is defined as engagement in more vigorous activities 2 to 3 times per week. Older ages and low education were associated with not meeting the recommendations, and this was especially evident among those who had initial functional decline. Although the beneficial effects of leisure time physical activities are well known, we know less about the association between occupational physical activity in midlife and disability in old age. This study showed that occupational physical activity in midlife was not associated with either personal or instrumental activities of daily living in late life in the total sample. However, stratified analysis showed that moderate occupational physical activity decreased the risk of disability in personal ADL among the white-collar workers, but not among the blue-collar workers. And this result highlights the importance of taking into account also the level and the quality of physical activity performed either at work or at leisure time. There is a great variability of physical limitations in late life, which remains largely unexplained. Several factors are associated with physical limitations, and I have only covered a few. Physical limitations in old age is the result of several exposure experienced during the whole life, which has been exemplified here both by early life factors such as education and midlife occupation and occupational physical activity, as well as by different factors in late life. In summary, physical limitations in old age cannot only be explained by chronic diseases and multimorbidity. So if we want to prevent physical limitations, we also have to take into account several factors, including demographic factors, social factors, genetic susceptibility, vascular risk factors, and lifestyle, as well as interactions between those factors. We need to implement a more scientific attitude in our approach to health and illness. Aging covers a long period of our life and is not necessarily linked to disease or disability. Thank you very much for listening to us. Ska vi
Ja, när det gäller åldrandet och vilken tid det tar av vårt liv så tar det väl egentligen hela livet från det att vi föds. Men jag tror det finns lite chans för frågor. Någon, och kom ihåg det här med mikrofonen. Och säg gärna namn och var ni kommer ifrån och sådär.
Går det bra att prata svenska eller engelska? Jag tänkte på det här med uppdelningen i blue collars och white collars. Ser du starkare effekter beroende på det än på utbildningsbakgrund?
Nej, utbildningen var mycket starkare. Jag hade mycket starkare effekt, men det fanns en viss interaktion mellan dem. Men utbildningen hade mycket starkare.
Jag hade en fråga till. Du började med det här med att kvinnor hade mer problem och rural, så har också personer på landsbygden. Har du några förklaringar till det?
Det finns olika sjukdomsbilder till exempel mellan män och kvinnor och det här med rural, det var olika typer av sjukdomar, hur sjukdomar påverkade disability. Det var komplexa mönster som förklarade det. Och könsskillnaden tror jag inte helt förklarade heller.